Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly podcast. We are, Tom and I am Tony Gerdeman. Tom is we. We are here at recording from the team meeting room at Ohio State following a very busy signing day, second signing day for the Buckeyes. Spoke with 7 of the early arrivals today, all 5 of the new assistant coaches, and Ryan Day. It's been a long day, Tom, but it's been pretty productive.
It has. It struck me on the way in. We have not talked to anyone affiliated with the program in any sort of official manner since we left California, which was more than a month ago.
Yeah.
So, in the same way that there was the one day where they just crammed all sorts of news about transfers and commitments and assistant coaching news all into one day, and it was like, spread this out, you monsters. It was the same thing on Wednesday. A whole month worth of news crammed all into about a 4-hour window.
Yeah, and I know the OSU SIDs wanted to split this up, but recruiting would not allow these coaches to ever come off the road.
You want to have a conversation about priorities. Where does bringing in the future of the Ohio State program rank relative to being convenient for us? I mean, I have my answer, and apparently they have theirs.
Well, exactly. Would you rather watch it or read about it? You want to read about it rather than just watch players on the field. You want to read about them. So that's why if there's background noise and we don't sound as crisp as normal, we're here in a room with other people who are also doing their thing. But so Tom, this is our first chance talking to the coaches, getting to see their personalities, to even address them and see their interaction. What I found interesting is I was sitting way off to the side because my laptop battery has a 3-minute shelf life, so I'm plugged into the wall. Behind me are the assistant coaches, and this is an hour process. And Greg Madison stayed for the entire thing. Jeff Hafley was there for most of it. Sometimes they would have to get up and do recruiting, but they stuck around and watched. That was interesting to me because we've seen forever around here where you just go grab a guy like Jerry Emig, the SID, or Mike Bassford will go and grab somebody and then pull them into a room for us. But these guys were they were hanging out, and it makes me think the media could really have some control around here for once.
They not only were the coaches in here listening to all of our very intelligent questions, they had donuts for us.
Yeah.
They had donuts for us. I don't want to say Ryan Day is well on his way to being the greatest head football coach in the history of Ohio State football, but I'm not saying that.
I'll say it. If you don't want to say it, I'll say it. Because even when Ryan Day was trying to leave, when the questions were done, he kept getting more questions, and he stayed. He did. Rather than having somebody thrown out like Urban Meyer would have done or Jim Tressel would have done, he stayed. I once saw Luke Fickell beat a man with a chair for an extra question.
It is a brave new era here in Ohio State, and I for one welcome our new Ryan Day overlords.
I am here for this. So we started first with Greg Madison today, I believe, and that was an interesting, because right off the bat he was asked, why did you leave Michigan? And I was also expecting some sort of wishy-washy blah blah, but he was like, I wanted to be a coordinator. That's why I came. I wasn't a coordinator at Michigan. I wanted to be a coordinator again. It had been 4 years, since our
since Brady Hoke left,
right, and since Don Brown came on, he was no longer the coordinator there. So this was an opportunity for him to do that, and it was something that he wanted to do. And we're thinking, there were rumors that maybe he was thinking about retiring or whatever. He didn't want to retire. He wanted more. He wanted more just underneath him, more responsibility. And so that's what he gets now at Ohio State. And it seemed like a pretty easy decision. And it was interesting to me how he spoke with Jim Harbaugh about it, and Jim Harbaugh understood. Mm-hmm. They couldn't offer him what Ohio State was offering, and now he gets to be a coordinator again, a co-coordinator.
Yeah, and I think that after listening to Madison, and then also listening to Madison explaining why it was a good fit for him, and Ryan Day explaining why it was a good fit for his staff,
yeah,
it makes a lot of sense. And from Day's perspective, Day's angle on it was basically what we talked about when this first happened. Because this was, you saw some of the earlier defensive coaching hires coming in, and it was like young guy, and all of a sudden, like, this guy's going to be 70 this year. This is not, one of these things is not like the other. And the way Day explained it was basically what we had more or less figured out before, which was Jeff Hafley's coming in. Jeff Hafley is the young, energetic guy with the bright future in the business, but he's coming in from the NFL. He spent the last 6 years in the NFL. He has not been a defensive coordinator before, so you pair him with the veteran college guy who's been a defensive coordinator, the two of them can kind of balance each other out. Provide, one's strengths are in one area, one's strengths are in the other area, and you put them together, and it's this like Voltron of defensive excellence.
I was going to say put peanut butter and chocolate, but Voltron also.
Voltron works. Only 80s kids will remember the Voltron of defensive excellence. Laurie Schmidt is looking at me and waving. Laurie Schmidt remembers Voltron. So you have, it all kind of makes sense. And Madison's background, just for, if we haven't, I don't remember if we've gone into this in any great detail, but he was a defensive coordinator for Michigan in the 90s, left to go be a defensive coordinator at Notre Dame, was in the NFL for a while with the Baltimore Ravens, came back to Michigan, was a defensive coordinator under Brady Hoke, and then
he was also at Florida at the time.
Yeah, he was at Florida under Urban Meyer. I mean, he has been around, and he has been at the top level of the sport for a long time. I mean, the worst of those programs was the Ty Willingham era Notre Dame or the Brady Hoke era Michigan, which, I mean, if that's the worst teams you were on, that's not too bad. So he's someone who's a big addition. And talking to Zach Harrison earlier today, that he had a great relationship with Greg Madison, he had a great relationship with Al Washington, he had a great relationship with Larry Johnson, and now he gets to play for all three of them because the two of them jumped ship from Michigan and came to Ohio State.
Well, and even Ryan Day just a little bit ago was joking about that, saying Zach Harrison has the biggest smile of anybody on campus because I think he said he's died and gone to heaven, which, But so he's got the three coaches that he was closest to in recruiting, and now they're all here. The combination of Greg Madison and Jeff Hafley, like you said, Day said he wanted like 2 older guys and 2 younger guys on the staff to mix well, and we know Madison knows the front 4 and the front 7, and Larry Johnson does as well. Hafley is this secondary wizard back end, which I thought was interesting, where what Day said, like, he could have had 6 or 7 NFL coordinator jobs this year. And wanted to come back to Ohio and be at Ohio State. And it was, I think almost everybody mentioned, like, why did they leave? They talked about wanting to come to this culture, to these players. Hafley, I think everybody was impressed by him. I know, looking at the message board, the fans love him already. He's a high energy guy, funny dude, which helps with quotes, and that's what we care about. But that seemed to be a win today for him, in terms of this is the first chance people get to see him, and now I think the people who watched feel like they know him pretty well already.
Yeah, and this was something that I thought about after. It was kind of like, ugh. But I remember sitting in this same room this time last year and thinking that Alex Grinch has a bright future in Columbus. So winning the press conference does not necessarily guarantee winning the season, but you can't do much better in a press conference than Jeff Hafley did. And just, he talked for, I think, 10, 12 minutes, something like that. But I'm just going to read out the one answer that I know every single person who's listening to this podcast cares about. The question was, do you want your corners turning and looking for the ball? And when Doug Lesmerises asked the question, there was kind of laughter in the room, because everyone gets the same question from readers, listeners. Like, that has been, if you were listening to this, you know that you have asked that question as well. Jeff Hafley's answer. All right, so here's the deal on that one. And if I ever see one of you guys tweet, do you think that we as defensive back coaches sit there and say, don't look back for the ball? Like, my wife used to come up to me after games and be like, hey, why don't our guys turn back and look for the ball? I'm like, do you want me to see my individual tape? All we do is practice turning and looking for the ball. DB coaches teach to turn and look for the football. We promise you we will practice to teach. This is awesome that you asked this, because now no one can tweet this out or say this. We're going to work on turning and looking and trying to intercept the football when we're in man. Now, there are certain parts of the field where it's not good to do that, so if we don't do it in a game, it might be a certain part of the field. But I promise you, come and watch individual. We'll turn and look for the ball. I don't know if you're allowed to or not. Don't trick me. I don't know all the rules. So he doesn't know whether we're allowed to come and watch individual drills, and the answer to that is no, but that's okay. So we cannot actually do what he said and come watch individual drills and see it, but that was pretty clear, pretty forceful. Sounds like they're going to be looking for the football. So all you people who've been yelling about that for years, sounds like something that problem might be getting a little different look this year.
But my thing about that is they were also coached to look for the football last year and the year before that, if they're in a position to do that. Mm-hmm. So I don't know how much things are actually changing in that regard, because you can't be looking back for the football at all times, or else the guy just ran by you. So I'm interested to see how this, like, is there really this big change, or is just the emphasis more on the looking back than the staying with the player?
It's February. Why don't you just let the people have this for the next 6 months, 7 months? No Ohio State cornerback is going to get toasted by another team's player for like 7 months. So let everyone have this for 7 months, and then after the first game, we can say, "Hey, you sold us."
What I can't wait for is in that first game, like 7 deep plays right down the sideline, just 9 routes that they get beat on because they're looking back for the ball, like 5 yards off the line of scrimmage, 10 yards off the line of scrimmage, and meanwhile, the receiver's not looking back for the football; he's just running to the spot where the ball is going to be. And then people are like, "Why are they always looking back for the football?" And then we can go back to Halfley, and then they'll be like, "Halfley, it's just Grinch 2.0.
If only we still had that Greg Schiano, who that's why Bill Belichick stole him away.
So that was Halfley, and then we talked with Matt Barnes, who came from Maryland, who will be Ohio State's assistant secondary coach and special teams coordinator. What I thought was interesting, what Day said was last year at Maryland, he handled the defense because of that whole shake-up there. I handled the defense and the special teams and was surprised that somebody so young was able to do both of those. And we've mentioned on the show before that he called the plays defensively last year and was really well thought of by the coaching realm. So this is our first chance to get to see him. He talked about, and I wanted to get a chance to ask him. I didn't get to, but he said the best players on the team will play special teams, but you have to balance that with also getting the younger guys an opportunity. And I wonder how much Ryan Day's philosophy is there going to be a change? We've talked about in the past where the proving ground of the special teams before you get on the field. I wonder if that's changing at all. I don't think it'll change much, but because veterans have always played special teams. You know, I mean, Terry McLaurin, for crying out loud, was always out there. And so there's this new emphasis on special teams. I don't think that's, I mean, one of the questions was like, you know, it was framed like this is the first time Ohio State has had a special teams coordinator. That's not true. That was Taylor Johnson last year. It was Kerry Combs the years before those. So while he's getting some attention for that, I don't really think anything dramatic is changing there. We still don't really have a definitive answer on how the secondary is going to work in terms of cornerbacks and safeties, like who's coaching what. When it was either Ryan Day or Halfley talked about the communication that needs to occur in the back end, it reminded me back a few years back, that was like C.J. Barnett and Christian Bryant. They were giving up some big plays, and it was always the communication. There's miscommunications up and down the board, and so there's a lot of big plays back in Urban Meyer's early days. And so, you know, just the importance of communication between those two positions and how, I don't know, how married they are, how separated they are. They'll be in the same room, maybe.
Yeah.
I'm still a little...
we didn't get a real firm answer on that. No, it seems like a lot of the specifics, like no one wanted to talk too much about scheme, no one wanted to talk too much about, you know, depth charts or any of that kind of stuff today. It's all kind of a little vague. I feel like we'll probably have a much better answer on a lot of that stuff once at least spring football starts, if not, get a week or two into spring ball, and then talk to these guys again once they've actually been out on the field and sort of figured out, okay, hey, these guys work well. We can do this, we can't do that. There was some talk about simplifying the defense,
yes,
which was
playing fast.
on the if you were looking for, if you as an Ohio State fan were looking for two things to hear about the defense, play fast, simplify things. Defensive backs are going to turn around. Someone was asked about playing just press man coverage, and I think it was Halfley. He was asked about playing press man coverage. He saw that a lot on film. They'll still do that. They're still going to be a press team, but they're going to mix it up. They'll play off. They'll kind of mix it up and not be. You don't want to be too predictable there. So a lot of the stuff that you as an Ohio State fan probably wanted to hear on Wednesday from all these assistant coaches, you heard. Now let's see how much of it gets translated to the practice field and then the game field.
Yeah, I don't know if it was Halfley or Barnes or Day. We've talked to a lot of people today, and they're all very similar people. But said, they were asked about the struggles last year defensively. It was either Halfley or Barnes. And he was like, well, I don't want to get into specifics on why things went wrong or whatever, but usually if there are issues and things are going wrong, it's because you're asking the players to do too much. Mm-hmm. And that's what we talked to Greg Schiano about in 2017. That's what we talked to him about last year, and it seemed like this is obviously what's going on. And we've mentioned before, Bill Davis told his guys when he was leaving, you'll never play in a more complicated defense than this one. Mm-hmm. And now the move is to go away from that complication, to eliminate the paralysis by analysis and just fire. And that was one of the things in 2014 where when Chris Ash brought his defense in, he had to simplify. You do it simply. Install the defense simply, and then you made it more complicated. But what they're going to do now is, like you said, simplify things so that players can play faster. And when you talk about schemes, I think the closest thing we got to that was Greg Madison saying there'd be, when he was talking about what position are you going to coach, he's like, well, I want to help out Larry Johnson. I want to do this. The linebackers, there's two inside linebackers and an outside linebacker, and they're different positions, mm-hmm. which immediately took me to Michigan's defense.
Yes, it was like a 4-2-5.
With their two inside linebackers and a hybrid linebacker. And when I asked Al Washington that, he was like, that's, like you said, they're still working some of these things out. Mm-hmm. But that seemed like a pretty significant lead for me that they would mention that.
That was how I interpreted it, and then I saw someone else who was sitting in the same room as us, listening to the same interviews, tweet out that it seemed like they were just looking at a mixture of, like a 4-3 and a 4-2-5, and just doing it situationally, and things are going to depend on, so it wouldn't necessarily be as much of that pure 4-2-5 kind of Michigan defense. So it's all, I think there was a little bit of open to interpretation, and again, it can all sound great right now, and they might get out on the field and go, actually our personnel better fits one of these systems versus another, or just in terms of the depth at a certain position. I mean, there's a lot of depth at linebacker. I don't know how many linebackers you want to pull off the field with as deep as a linebacker unit is. So
as questionable as the safeties are.
The defensive backs are not terribly deep, and there was not a ton of success there last year. And there's so much depth at that linebacker position, even without a Keandre Jones there anymore, or there's so much depth there that it seems like it would be very difficult to keep everyone happy with really basically just two linebackers on the field full time.
Yeah, I agree, and that was something that everybody said. We don't really know what we have yet. Yeah. They've been recruiting; they're only starting to see workouts a little bit right now. There's obviously no football going on, so you don't know exactly what you have. You think you might know what you'd like to do, mm-hmm. but then once spring gets here, you're like, well, we can't do that.
Yeah.
Because again, we're not trying to ask players to do what they can't. We're trying to simplify them and allow them to move quickly and do things that they can do. And that was one of the things Halfley said was designing your defense around what you've got. Mm-hmm. And that was something that Jim Tressel always talked about with his offense. Mm-hmm. designing the offense around what you have. One year they could have, they went from Troy Smith to Todd Beckman to Terrell Pryor and had to do different things. And they didn't try to make Terrell Pryor Todd Beckman. They didn't try to make Todd Beckman Troy Smith. So you use what you have, and then eventually you recruit to what you want to do. And I think that's what's going to happen eventually. Another thing, and there's so much stuff, and we'll forget what to talk about. But Ryan Day, he was asked, when did you last speak to Jim Harbaugh? And he said December. So December was when he started talking to Jim Harbaugh about Greg Madison and Al Washington. Well before the bowl game, and who knows who has what job, and the defensive staff is on eggshells or whatever. So he was preparing for this, but he said it wasn't about fixing the 2018 defense for the 2019 season. It was about what defense did he want for the next 3 or 4 years down the road. I thought that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, it was there. There was a lot of talk at Rose Bowl time about evaluating things after the Rose Bowl, and there's time to look at that and figure out who we want to bring in and all that kind of stuff. But if he's talking to Jim Harbaugh in December about specific guys, about bringing in, whether it was, there was the rumor that it was Don Brown at one point. There's obviously Greg Madison and Al Washington ended up being targets. So you end up with, if he was looking at those guys at that point, I think he at least had a sense for what he wanted to run, and that they needed to make some change to be able to run the kind of defense he wanted to run. And so that also happened to remove coaches units didn't perform up to par last year. But coaches don't ever want to talk badly about their own assistants. You almost never hear someone, it's always so-and-so is going to pursue opportunities elsewhere. So-and-so is, Urban Meyer was very famously proud of the fact that he never fired an assistant coach until Zach Smith last year. But that was like a big point of pride for him, because you want to make sure you're maintaining good relationships. This is a very small, controlled, circle of people, a small environment. And so you want to keep good relationships with everyone. You don't want to blow anyone up. So, that you have to kind of take everything view everything that's said through that prism, in terms of what the reasons for changes were and all that. But that's all kind of worth keeping in mind. But yeah, the fact that he was talking to Jim Harbaugh about getting permission to talk to assistant coaches back in December, it was kind of like my eyebrows kind of went up, like, oh, that's interesting.
And so he did, called up Jim Harbaugh, because that's what you do when you're going to hire somebody. You talk to their boss and talk to them about the person. And just like Harbaugh understood Greg Madison, Al Washington said that he understood Jim Harbaugh was fine and understood why he was leaving for Ohio State. Al Washington is from Ohio. His wife is from Columbus. His wife is from here. His family, his mom and dad are still, 10 minutes away, 20 minutes away.
Yeah, he went to Bishop Watterson High School, which is just a Columbus Catholic high school. So he's
a couple of young
real
kids.
Local. Yeah.
So this was a no-brainer, but still a difficult decision, because, like he said, when he's somewhere, he's all in.
Right.
And it was interesting to me. He was asked, was this a dream job? And he said, it wasn't a dream job, because this opportunity doesn't always happen. And I've talked to other coaches before where they're like, sometimes it's just about timing. Like Ryan Day being the head coach here, it needed timing. So I don't even know who the head coach or who the coach was, but he was like, you can't look at it as a dream job, because you don't know if the timing will work out, and you don't even want to think about being there. Maybe it was Brian Peden.
That was Alex Grinch last year talked about that. Yeah.
But so this opportunity arises, and then after the fact, he's like, now I'm here. Maybe it's like, wow, it should have been my dream job, because now he's back home. And I think if there's one area on the field, Tom, where you see the biggest improvement, is there anything close to the linebackers in terms of immediately where you expect to see improvement from last year?
I think there's a pretty good chance you're going to see improvement from the linebackers and the safeties at beginning of the year to beginning of the year. And whether this is one of these things where you're changing so many variables. We talked about this with the wide receivers last year. You're changing lots of variables. You're changing the quarterback. You're changing the wide receiver coach. You're running a little bit of a different offense. So the wide receivers are much better. And you can, everyone has their theories on which of those variables were most important to the improvements there. And it's the same thing this year. You've got new defensive coordinators running a different scheme under a different head coach. You've got a different linebackers coach. The players are mostly the same. So, it was very similar to last year. The wide receiver players were the same. So that was kind of a controlled variable. And it's going to be the same thing this year with the linebackers. It's going to be mostly the same linebackers and mostly the same safeties probably. But it's going to be hard to attribute that to one specific thing. Is that just, the linebacker coach is better this year, or the scheme is better this year, or the players are just another year of experience or doing better this year. You can attribute it to whatever you want to, but I do think those are two areas where, for one reason or another, you are going to see a substantially better play this year compared to a comparable time period last year.
I think that just like the receivers got better because of the quarterback's arm, the linebackers will get better because of the quarterback. we also talked.
Sometimes the most important things are the things we don't say.
This podcast is like jazz, Listen for the
listen for the notes that we're not playing.
Yeah, that we shouldn't have played. Mike Yursich, we also talked to him. Ryan Day's replacement as passing game coordinator and co-offensive coordinator, I guess. I don't know. There is the whole talk about the Big 12 offense, and he's one of the things that Ryan Day said about him is that he has led one of the best offenses in the nation for years now, and they score points, and that's a pretty good combination. He isn't looking to run what Yursich said. He's learning. I thought was interesting. He's learning the offense along with Justin Fields in the quarterback's room with Ryan Day, and so he's not looking to implement Oklahoma State's offense. There's no. It was interesting where Ryan Day said the offense was the same under Dwayne Haskins as it was JT Barrett. It's just the emphasis of the plays they called is different. The plays are different. So is this still the Urban Meyer offense that we will see this year with a different emphasis on plays? Maybe, but Yursich will bring in some different things. Like Ryan Day mentioned, they had some really good RPO stuff this year, this past year. And if you watch any of their games, you'll see it. That's one of the reasons you see dudes wide open down the middle of the field is because of the RPO stuff. And so I would expect to see that return this year, provided the run blocking is there.
Yeah, and they got away from the RPOs last year. Largely, it seems due to the offensive line just not working with the offensive line they had last year. Great news: 4 of the 5 offensive linemen from last year are not there anymore. So you have a whole new batch of offensive linemen to potentially work on the RPO stuff with this year. So that's going to be, that in and of itself is kind of a good start for them. Yursich is an interesting guy because when Day says he was consistently running this really great offense at Oklahoma State, he's not just blowing sunshine. Sometimes coaches will just kind of happy talk something like that. Greg Madison called Brady Hoke a great coach today. That's sometimes coaches just say stuff. But Yursich is, if you just look at S&P Plus, which controls for opponent, controls for situation, controls for a lot of different stuff, and is just kind of a pretty just straightforward, objective, yards per play, explosive plays, just measure of an offense. Oklahoma State has been very consistent over the last 5 years. I think his first year, I looked at this a couple weeks ago, I think his first year was they were 30th or 40th, something like that, and then once he got rolling, it was 7th, 4th, 5th, 8th, 7th, which, it's to do that at Oklahoma State and have a consistent offense where you're not recruiting, you are not getting Ohio State level talent at Oklahoma State. And it's easy to kind of pass that off as, Big 12 defenses. But, you saw Ohio State against the Big 12 defense last year, and it didn't look fantastic. And there are also 9 other Big 12 teams out there who get to play against Big 12 defenses, and they're not all in the top 4 every year. So, there is really something there. So it's going to be real interesting to see what he can do with Ohio State level talent, because that's something he has not had to work with before, and he's been able to do some pretty spectacular stuff just with the, he's been able to put out a 5-star offense with 3-star talent. So now let's see what he can do with 4 and 5-star Ohio State talent on offense.
And prior to Ryan Day getting up here, he was the last one to talk. Ohio State got the commitment from Enoch Vamahi, who I guess intends to enroll for a year and then possibly take a 2-year mission. Now, what Ryan Day said was like, well, that's still, to be determined. We'll see how things go. And we mentioned, I think, last week that if he does go on the mission, I mean, you're probably talking 2023 before he's like in line to start. But clearly, it was somebody they felt they needed to go after. Like Ryan Day mentioned, he got on the plane there, stayed for 3 hours, then got back on the plane. Which I don't know, how long does that jack you up in terms of jet lag?
And he took a red eye home.
Yeah.
Like you want to know? I mean, there was the story about Kevin Wilson driving to Indianapolis to drive DeJuan Jones back for a recruiting visit in December or January, whenever that was, January. And so that's pretty impressive. Kevin Wilson's willing to drive in a snowstorm to go get DeJuan Jones. And Ryan Day is willing to fly to Hawaii for a 3-hour visit and then take a red eye home. Like Ryan Day talked about how busy he's been. That's a long time on an airplane to go get one kid. But that paid off. We're recording this at 2:42 in the afternoon on Wednesday, so the DeJuan Jones thing has not officially happened yet, but it sounds for all the world. It seems like there's a very high level of confidence in this building that he will end up in the class. If you end up with those 2 guys, as much of a concern as the offensive line has been all month, I mean, we have written, I think I've lost count of how many stories we've
17.
written. Is it 17?
Yep.
I would believe that. Because it is that is the big, blaring red light siren, like, hey, this is a problem. To bring in those 2 guys is big. And then if they have the opportunity to add at least one of the grad transfer offensive linemen, whether it's Jonah Jackson from Rutgers, Parker Braun from Georgia Tech, who I wrote about this week, either of those guys, that is such a huge difference, because you've already gone from, if you add Vamahi, you add Jones, that takes you from 11 to 13. That's a big jump. And then you add another one, get to 14 scholarship offensive linemen. All of a sudden, that's like a reasonable number. That's no longer major issue. And if one of the grad transfers is only here for a year, okay. If Vamahi takes the mission trip and he's not here for 2020, 2021, okay. This does not solve the problem for good, but it makes this year all of a sudden not a disaster, and that's really all they needed to do. And for Ryan Day and his staff to have done that during this transition period, that is real impressive.
Yeah, I'm going to change subjects a little bit, but thinking what else about Ryan Day today? Like, the 2 most surprising things for me was that he gave the scholarship count. Mm-hmm. He told us how many players there were, and I think, did Vamahi make it 84?
Vamahi made it 84. They have one more spot, which would be DeJuan Jones.
Right.
So that would get them to 85, which is the scholarship count we had.
Then you've got the 2 graduate transfers. If any of those guys come in, that's an extra. He made it seem like they probably won't get a 4th quarterback because they don't have room. Plus, it's just tough to bring them in because it's not as available as it used to be.
That was very interesting, because there are coaches who will not talk about scholarship numbers. Like
Urban Meyer never did
Nick Saban will not talk about scholarship numbers. Urban Meyer generally, at most, talked about it kind of vaguely.
He'd say, we'll be fine, we'll be fine.
Yeah, Ryan Day was up there and
I don't know.
Yeah, Ryan Day was up there and had specific numbers and talked about 85 as a hard cap, and it is 85 without having this, the grad transfer offensive lineman, without having a theoretical 4th quarterback. you're at 85 right now, assuming they get DeJuan Jones as we expect them to. That does not mean you're going to be at 85 after spring ball, when we've talked about guys having the spring awakening and, hey, maybe I'm not going to get a chance to play here and I want to go somewhere else to have a chance to play.
Justin Fields.
So,
just kidding. I'm kidding.
So that was Gerd, by the way, in case you couldn't tell. It was kind of muffled. Send your angry tweets to @Tony Gerdeman. So, being at 85 on February 5th, or February 6th, whatever this is, February 6th, does not mean you're at 85 on May 1st when you have Parker Braun graduates the first week of May. We have mentioned Gunnar Hoke in the past as someone who graduates from Kentucky in early May. If those two guys, for example, are available and they are at, and a couple guys transfer, I would not be at all surprised to see them add, whether it is Parker Braun or Jonah Jackson or Gunnar Hoke or Nick Starkel from Texas A&M. Fill in the blank with whatever names you want to here, but I would not be surprised to see them end up with a few new faces between now and the start of fall camp.
Yeah, and they can actually be at 88 until fall camp, or until August.
That's the Big Ten rule,
right?
Yeah.
But I don't think they'll need to be, because players always leave after spring, so that will continue. The other amazingly surprising thing that Ryan Day said today when talking about Cormonte Hamilton, called him a tight end / H-back / fullback.
Fullback, yes.
So it would seem like you don't just use those words. You don't just use that word fullback if there isn't some intention of using him in that way. But they've used Luke Farrell that way when you've got the tight end motioning in as sort of a fullback there. So that's not unusual. I just thought it was interesting that he used the word fullback for the first time since 2012.
I was going to say, I can't remember the last time I actually heard the word fullback in this room. It really that stood out to me a little bit too. The other thing that was kind of interesting that Day talked about, and this might be just sort of addressing, if people are wondering, hey, why is this class only, I don't know, we're going to finish 15th or something like that in the country, and it's because it's a small class. And the reason it's a small class is because they don't have 12 guys in the transfer portal like Penn State does, or, he didn't say Penn State, but, he
didn't go Penn State.
He has more class and decorum than some people on this podcast. But if you look at some of the schools that are bringing in 27 kids this year are going to have the schools that are bringing in 27 kids this year are the ones that are going to be high in just total overall recruiting rankings. The average player ranking in this Ohio State class is basically exactly where it's been during the Urban Meyer years, which is historically anomalous and remarkably high. So, yeah, don't worry. If you're looking at this ranked 15th class and wondering what's wrong with Ryan Day, can he not recruit? No, it's fine. That's why. And when they have a bigger class next year, they're going to be a lot higher than 15th.
When you said historically anomalous and would you say ridiculously high?
Yes.
I was thinking that's like a good title for a college memoir. As an aside, if you just wanted to use that for your own, I would not be fitting for me.
I wouldn't steal that. That was your band's name. I would never steal that from you.
So, was there anything else from the coaches? There is. I just, we're sitting here, no notes or anything.
Yeah.
Anything else stick out?
That was kind of the big stuff for today. We'll probably get into a whole bunch more with the player interviews next week when we do an actual more formal podcast. Justin Fields. The guys who are the interesting people, the people that I think there was the most interest in talking to today, just from Ohio State fans. Justin Fields, Garrett Wilson, Zach Harrison. Those guys are kind of the headliners of the class, of the guys who are the early enrollees. But I came away very impressed with all those players, because in most cases this is the first time we get a chance to really sit down and talk to them. Like Zach Harrison, Zach Harrison was very quiet, very reserved during his whole recruiting process, and it was like, I wonder how his adjustment to college is going to be, and he's going to be in the spotlight now, and nope, Zach Harrison did just fine. Zach Harrison is a very impressive kid, and, very I mean, very obviously a very smart kid. He comes from a very good family, and any concern you might have had about, hey, maybe he's too shy and it won't, it'll just be overwhelming for him to meet with them. No, he was fine. Don't worry about him. He had 10 TV cameras in his face on Wednesday, and he did just fine.
Yeah, Justin Fields did well as well. I mean, he's not some arrogant dude who feels like this should be handed to him. He said Ryan Day promised him nothing. He said he was surprised that Tate Martell transferred. Ryan Day said they were disappointed by it. Interestingly, back when Ronnie Hickman committed, you said anytime you can get somebody named the Rocket, nicknamed the Rocket, you have to do that. Do you know how he got the nickname the Rocket, though?
It was something I read about this last summer. It was something when he was a little kid or something. He was
it has nothing to do with his speed.
Well, but still, I think my point still stands.
No, it doesn't. Nickname him. I mean, what if he rolls around like instead of like? Thank you, Tim. But he could have been the Pumpkin just because he rolls around as a baby. Instead, the dad was like, "No, we're going to call him a Rocket." And it's like, yeah, but he rolls like a pumpkin. Let's call him Pumpkin. And now you're going to be like...
Now I'm trying to think of the greatest college football player ever nicknamed the Pumpkin.
And then if you're like, well, you got to recruit a guy named the Pumpkin, you're talking about the same player. All right? So we can't go in with nicknames anymore, other than an Ishmael. Like, then you got the Rocket, you've got the Missile, and you had the Bomb. Those guys you recruit, yes. Rockets, from now on, we got to find out where the origins of these nicknames before handing out offers. Just my opinion.
He was. I only talked to him for just a minute today. He was coming off of an injury.
Yeah.
He was still kind of recovering.
He hopes to be ready this spring, but it doesn't seem.
That didn't seem like overly. And he's not. He's not at a position where I think they would expect him to play a ton on defense.
Yeah.
He comes in as a safety. Probably not a place where they would bring him in as a true freshman to play. So you're probably looking more at a special teams player this year anyway. So no real reason to rush it if there's any kind of question this spring with him.
Talked to Ryan Jacoby, offensive lineman out of Mentor, who walked in with a pizza at 9:30 in the morning, sausage and pepperoni, I believe. Has no surprise, has added 10 pounds since he arrived, and is up to about 290 or 295 at 6'5". He said he's starting out at tackle, so that's where just walk around. As soon as you enter the building, here's your pizza. I mean, who wouldn't commit?
Like we said, this is the Ryan Day era. The media's getting donuts, the players are getting pizza. This place is great.
This is the good life.
Urban who?
Yeah, exactly. So then his teammate in high school, Noah Potter, was also here today. I asked him for like a scouting report on Ryan, and he's like, well, he's strong, he's got good hands, and if he gets a hold of you, he won't let go. I'm like, so you're saying he holds? He's like, well, all offensive linemen hold, but he's good at it. So who else did we talk to? Marcus Crowley did not have a lot of people around him, which surprised me. But we did talk to him here and there. He said, I asked him like, what will people see from you? What will Buckeye fans see from you? He's like, I'm a tough runner. He's very unassuming. Doesn't seem to seek out the spotlight, and he was under the radar as a recruit, even though he was committed to Miami. And he's like, it doesn't bother me because look where I am now. It's like usually some guys might have a chip on their shoulder, be angry about it, but he's like, I'm at Ohio State.
Yeah, this all worked out just fine for him.
I can't be too angry.
Yeah.
Garrett Wilson, we mentioned, when I watch him, he's maybe 6 foot, but he plays so much bigger than that. He high points the ball so well. I mean, and the thing the word that always comes to me is he's just natural. Everything he does is natural, and it's just God-given, basically. And what Ryan Day said is like, he also plays other sports, so he's never really just focused on football, and now he's going to, and you'll see the potential just take him to the next level.
Yeah, that's the scary thing, because you look at him on the all-star circuit or just his stats in high school, and they're just eye-popping and doing stuff that you've never seen wide receivers coming to Ohio State do at that level. And to think that, oh yeah, and he hasn't ever, like, this is the first time he's really going to be trying to just focus on football is like, whoa, that is what he could be in a year or two is pretty crazy. A couple other notes from Day just on the true freshman coming in. Steel Chambers is starting at running back, which we had assumed and said before. Craig Young will start at linebacker, but could end up pretty much anywhere. Those are both, I think we basically had those guys slotted into those spots on that scholarship chart already anyway, so neither of those is a big surprise. Jamison Williams sounds like he's going to come in and maybe take a year before he's ready to contribute. Like Garrett Wilson may have a better chance to contribute on offense as a true freshman than Jamison Williams does. So that's, I mean, and again, that's not a huge surprise, especially since Wilson is here in the spring and Williams isn't, so.
Yeah, I think that covers it pretty well. And again, we're going to pour through all of the player interviews again and the coaching interviews again and not just rehash this all in the next show, or maybe do a better job of it on maybe in a couple of days we'll record something, who knows. But this was just, we wanted to give you a quick instant reaction, if you will, of the day, because it was a big day. There was a lot to it, a lot of new and interesting things. I mean, spring football is maybe a month to the day, possibly. Yeah, I believe. So it's right around the corner. We'll start to get you guys prepared for it. This was signing day. Congratulations on your signings.
It was quite not quite the spectacle that it used to be before the early signing day, but it was.
You know what I miss is Jim Tressel used to go through on signing day and would show highlights of the players and talk about each one. I'm not saying we're all very happy that Ryan Day is here instead of Urban Meyer. I mean, we can admit that, but if there's one critique, it'd be like, let's see some highlights and give us some quotes. Maybe next year. He's got 2 signing days to get it right, you know. So we'll see. But thank you all for listening. And like I said, maybe the next show might be sooner than next week. I don't know. Timing is an issue. We'll see. But thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.